rather perfect. It's been rather idyllic, which we're not used to in Minnesota. And idyllic kind of upsets us because we want to wait for the other shoe to drop. We are masters of complaint and self-effacing people with much to efface about. And I tell you, it just makes you uneasy when the weather is as perfect as it is. We are people who are prepared for disappointment, and when we confront idyllic, what do you say? How can you talk about it? But you have to, adapt and accept that sometimes there is such a thing as perfection. And I was in the Chatterbox Cafe this last week, and I ate a radish off a dish in the middle. Dorothy sat down in the middle of the table. There were a bunch of us there, and I ate this radish, and it was the radish of all radishes. It was so good. It had that little bite to it. It had that little sting to it, and it was fresh, and it was cold. It just made up for so much. But it had been idyllic, so what was there to make up for? She has this contract with a commune out near Lake Wobegone called Earth People, and they raise fabulous vegetables. They raise incredible tomatoes that have realized their tomatohood and are not bred for shelf life as most of our tomatoes are. They're so gorgeous. You bite into one and it's a redemptive experience. This is a commune of millennials who are all busy writing sensitive memoirs about self-realization. But in their spare time, they grow these amazing vegetables. And so we can forgive them, for all of their nonsense about inclusivity and diversity and all of that sort of thing, you want diversity, go to the city. That's where you find it, okay? Out here, it's just us people and also them, so. Clint Bunsen was there in the Chatterbox. He is a classmate of mine. He is my age, and he was there to get away from his great-grandson, Boz, who had beaten him at Scrabble and beaten him badly. The child is 10 years old, and he had 3 bingos in one game, 3 7-letter words. He got bigotry and sequins and seizure. How does a 10-year-old know the word seizure? Where does it come from? This kid just reads like a house of fire, and he beat Clint 410 to 223. And so Clint just wanted to get out of the house. This kid reads everything, and he remembers everything that he reads, and he wants to tell you about it. And so Clint just needed some time off from brilliance, and he found the right people, us. His classmates, Carl was there, and Dwayne Tallerud was there, and Margie Kupsbach was there, and Clint's wife Irene, and her cousin Charlene was there, and I was there. I sat down, and they welcomed me, even though they know everything about me, and I know so much about them. We know each other much too well, and we know all the same stories. And I sat down, and of course, in Lake Wobegone, I'm always aware of the 2 free throws that I missed in 1958. And it was against St. Francis, and I was put in the 4th quarter as a sub, and they fouled me. We were down by 2 points. And I went to the free throw line, and we were up against this team in the district tournament, this team of scrawny farm boys, and we were sort of spooked by our own superiority. This was the year that we were supposed to go to the state tournament, and there I was at the free throw line, and I missed 2 free throws. The first ball hit the rim, and the second ball spun around on the rim, and it fell off. And I ruined the lives of dozens and dozens of people who will always think back to that moment. But they were good enough not to tell me about it, because they don't need to, because I know that they know. And so there's no need in going over it again. They never bring up St. Francis or St. Francis of Assisi or Pope Francis or France, for that matter. Stay away from all of that. No, we were all there because we had been to the funeral of our classmate, Ronnie Hansen, and that was the day before. He was not a likable person, but he's our classmate. It was a small class, so we all went to the funeral. He flew 757s for United Airlines and had a big life. Died in a car crash down in Florida. His dad, Jerry, was the town drunk and also our school bus driver. Both positions were open, and he would drive steering with his knees and had a cigarette in one hand, and he had a coffee cup in the other, which he kept flavoring from a bottle that he kept under the seat. And he watched us kids in the mirror on the visor over the window, and he looked at us closely, and he said, "Any one of you kids rat on me, believe me, I will know who it is, and you will be awfully sorry for a long time to come." Anyway, Ronnie was rather successful, and he had a big house, and he had a beautiful wife, and collected paintings, lived down on Cedar Lake in Minneapolis. He was successful right up to the day that he died. His wife and so forth. He used his free miles to fly around the country to visit his girlfriends in Florida and in California while his wife was doing volunteer work in Minneapolis. And that's the sort of man he was. The last time I saw him was at the class reunion a couple of years ago, and we were standing side by side at the urinal trough in the men's room, and he looked over at me and he said, "That looks just like a penis, but it's so small." And I turned towards him and I said, "That's an awfully immature thing to say." And then he jumped back because his leg was all wet, and he slipped on the wet floor, and he fell on his right wrist, and he broke his wrist, which he didn't know about until he got up and he tried to take a swing at me, and then he heard this terrible crack, and the sheer pain brought him down to his knees, and he cursed me. And you realize at a time like this that there are so few really good curse words in English. You have to repeat them over and over and over. And there aren't enough for what you need in that sort of a situation. Anyway, he died in Florida. He was in a big hurry to meet his girlfriend and to get naked, and he just had a couple of hours in between flights, and he was going 80 miles an hour, and he went over a hill, and suddenly the road turned yellow with bananas that had fallen off a truck with a busted tailgate, and Ronnie hit the brakes, which is the wrong thing to do when you're driving on bananas, and he skidded 300 feet, and he crashed into a eucalyptus tree, and he died. You could smell the eucalyptus in the coffin when they brought it back. It smelled like a cough drop. Anyway, his sister Rhonda persuaded the Lake Wobegone Herald-Star to print an obituary in which she said that he'd gone to Florida to visit his friend Father Antonio of Christian Brothers Mission, who was dying of cancer, and for whom Ronnie had flown supplies to impoverished children in Nicaragua. And he was hurrying because Father Antonio was close to death, and he was coming over a hill, and he saw 3 orphans from the orphanage starting to cross the road, and he aimed his car right into the tree, and the cop who peeled him off the tree heard his last words. He said, Digitales a los niños que Deo amas. Tell the little ones that God loves them. Which if you knew Ronnie, you'd know is pure fiction. Never spoke any Spanish in his life. And we all agreed and knew that, the bananas and the naked woman waiting for him, that was the heart of the story. But, if it made anybody feel better to be lied to, then I guess that's that. And just then a stranger walks in who we recognize vaguely, but it's been so long. It's been 30-some years since we saw him. Kyle. We remember his name. He is Daryl Tollerood's second cousin, once removed. And he went south, and we haven't heard a word from him since. He sat down, we said, long time no see, and he introduces his wife, Melissa, and they sit down with us, and we offer him radishes and tomatoes. And I was not going to mention what I remember Kyle for, the equivalent of the 2 missed free throws. I remembered him very well the last time I saw him, but I wasn't going to bring it up. But Charlene did, because she had not been there when it happened 30 years ago. And she said, I've always wanted to meet you because I heard so much about that time that you were flying on a parasol over the lake, being towed by a speedboat, and you were carrying your grandma's ashes along with you. And the boat swerved to avoid a pontoon boat that was carrying 22 agnostic Lutheran pastors. And you fell in the water, and the speedboat towed you underwater at high speed, and you lost the ashes, and it tore the swim trunks from your body. And then you rose out of the water, and you flew naked in front of everybody. And I just always was curious, did I get all, and you almost crashed into a hot air balloon, if I got that story right. Isn't that right? Well, Daryl said it wasn't a parasol, it was a parasail. Very different. And they were not agnostics, they were Lutheran pastors who simply felt that the Lutheran Church should be open to all deists and welcome them to communion, whether or not they believed in the other two or not. And the bishop did not approve of this and felt they'd been corrupted by living in New York for too long, and so he sent them on a bus tour of Lutheran Minnesota so they could get back straight. And there were not 22 of them, there were 24 of them. And the pontoon boat capsized, and we managed to rescue all of them, including some who could not swim, for whom, I must say, it was sort of a redemptive experience, if that's what they were looking for. And Clint stepped in. He said, now that was Wally's pontoon boat, Wally, who was the owner of the Sidetrack Tap at the time, and his pontoon boat, Agnes D, that he rented out to the Detmer family for their daughter, Debbie Detmer's wedding that was to take place out on the lake, and it was canceled because she and her fiance flew out from San Francisco, and they got in an argument about whether his brother could sing a song that he had written about resisting and rebelling against conventions, a song in which there were obscenities, or if one of the bridesmaids would sing "You've Got a Friend." And this difference between the couple turned into an all-out battle, because the fact is that they had fallen in love in San Francisco, where she worked as a veterinary aromatherapist. And they did not have close friends who would tell them, "You are making a big mistake." And so they went ahead with this wedding, and now at the last minute, here was their last minute desperate attempt to avoid going over the cliff, and they had this argument and they broke up and they went their separate ways, and the pontoon boat was left over from that wedding, and that's what the 24 Lutheran pastors were riding in, and that's what the hot air balloon that flew in had been hired by the Detmer family to carry the married couple away when they finally said their vows. And Debbie Detmer went back to San Francisco, and she resumed her career in veterinary aromatherapy, and there you get to meet a lot of people with way too much money. And she met a man, older man, and he was quite wealthy because he had invented a thing like a hearing aid, except it will tell you if you are repeating yourself. So there were millions coming, and he adored her, and because he did not have a brother who was a songwriter, there was no impediment to their getting married, and so they did. And the Lutheran ministers, went off to solve their own problems, and because the guy who was driving the speedboat was looking out for Lutheran ministers, and so he couldn't look up and see that Kyle was on a collision course with a hot air balloon. None of it went all over this story, and Carl said, now that was Dwayne Dober who was driving that speedboat, and he was so careless, and he was half blind, and whenever he'd go out on the lake, fishermen would head for shore until they found out that the sound of his motor roused the walleyes from their slumbers, and so they just put out lighted buoys to warn him away, but finally somebody punched a hole in his boat, and there was nobody in town who could repair it, and so he took it down to Minneapolis, and he liked Minneapolis, and so he stayed there, and so we haven't seen him ever since, and that's kind of the end of that story. Irene spoke up, and she said, now that was your grandma Evelyn's ashes that you were carrying, and you were carrying them in a bowling ball, as I recall. It was a green bowling ball that had been given to her by her boyfriend, Raoul, after her husband, Elmer, died, to whom she had been married for 57 years, the same as the number of varieties that Heinz ketchup has, except there was no variety in their marriage at all, and so when finally Elmer passed, she met Raoul, and he came into her life, and she was the happiest woman for about 6 years. And they said that she died in her sleep, but she suffered from such insomnia that I had to wonder about it, because she lived with her daughter, your aunt Barbara, lived with her. Barbara, who was a nurse at elder care in Brainerd, and who was very well known up there for being able to sense when a resident was prepared to leave this world, and who would visit them in the middle of the night with a cocktail containing morphine and certain other chemicals, and she would help them to it, and she would sit and hold their hand for a few hours until they stopped respirating. Irene said, my sister Arlene used to refer to her as the snuff queen. I spoke to her once about it, and she said, death is just a matter of biology. And life is life. Life is good, but the end of life is not nearly so good. And what seems tragic to you in your youth, when you come to the end of it, is not tragic at all. It's a relief. And so she helped ease people to the end, and then she would bundle them up, and she would put them in the morgue, and she would make up the deathbed for the new resident, and spare the family having to do a 2-day, 3, 4-day, week-long death watch, and off they went to the next world. No. Irene said, I went to visit Evelyn once, and she was asleep on the couch, and I saw Barbara standing over her and looking at her in a professional sort of way. And I stayed. I stayed until Evelyn woke up. And it was about a few days after that Barbara was taking a nap on the couch, and she felt an odd tickling sensation. She woke up, and here was her cat, Charlie, who had a piece of wet gauze in his paw and was holding it to her nose. And it smelled of chloroform. And Barbara threw him against the wall. She killed him. She killed the cat. A matter of self-preservation, which Evelyn grieved for the cat, but it was that grief that in an odd way led her to meet Raoul. And so that made her happy, and it all worked out in the end. Carl said, anyway, you dropped the bowling ball in the lake, you know, and Blaine was towing you underwater at high speed, and your swim trunks came off. And, I guess Raoul walked in and got the ashes and the bowling ball, and he took them home with him, and so all's well that ends well, and the pastors went off to deal with their apostasy, or whatever you would call it, and here we are, and we haven't even heard you say a word, Kyle. We've been doing all the talking here, so what brings you home? Well, Kyle said, I live in North Carolina, and I'm running for Congress, and I'm a Democrat, and it's a Republican district, but I think I stand a chance because the incumbent resigned, and his brother is running, who is dumber than a stump. And meanwhile, they're trying to gather some dirt on me, and I recall that when I was flying naked under that parasol, holding the bowling ball with Grandma's ashes in it, that somebody was shooting a video. And I came up here to find that video. Well, Clint said, that was my brother. That was my brother, Clarence. It's an old video camera, and he took videos of all sorts of things, and when his beloved wife Arlene died this last year, he was just so brokenhearted. He destroyed all of those videos because he couldn't bear to look at them any longer. It just broke his heart. So your secret is safe, because none of us have any plans to go to North Carolina, and of course we wouldn't tell, even if we were to go, even if you paid us an enormous amount of money, which of course you wouldn't. So your secret is safe. And Kyle said, thank you, that puts my mind at rest. It's a story about the death of a beloved woman, Arlene, who died, and her death wiped out an embarrassment from the past that might have kept this young man from pursuing his opening to make something of himself. It's a story with a moral. The past ends, let the future begin. We all agreed on that. We didn't say it in so many words, but that's what we take away from that little lunch. And it was a wonderful radish. Just a beautiful radish. I'm not exaggerating. It was a perfect radish. That's the news from Lake Wobegone, where all the women are strong.